At the exact same minute as this video is set to release, 78 years ago, the world would come into contact with the first ever use. Well, the second ever use. I meant to get this out on the 7th, but what can you do? With the second ever use, the final ever use, of an atomic bomb as a strategic weapon. Now, 78 years on, I'm going to ask this question and cover some of the lesser known parts of this event. Hiroshima and Nagasaki at 78. How does one justify the nuke and its aftermath? The story of the nuclear bomb has been getting into our public consciousness quite a lot this year with the release of Oppenheimer, and its portrayal therein of the Trinity test at Los Palmos in New Mexico. But we are going to discuss here the actual atomic bombings in Japan. And of course, the first question that comes to mind with this is, why did Japan have to be nuked? Why not go ahead with Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan? But here's the thing. The plan was made before some of the most hardest battles of the Pacific. Namely, Saipan and Iwo Jima. On Saipan, the Americans faced one of their first banzai charges, which caused more Japanese casualties than it did American. And of course, the Battle of Iwo Jima is famous for its kamikaze and banzai attacks by the Japanese. Hell, the Japanese even planned to beach their flagship, the Yamato, on Iwo Jima and have it act as a fortress that the Americans would have to overcome, only it was intercepted on the way there by the American Navy and sunk. And this is just military casualties. There is a reason that these cliffs on Saipan are known as Suicide Cliff, where, after the Americans had captured the island, the Japanese civilians, fed in by the propaganda of their homeland, decided to end it all rather than, as the propaganda had told them, become slaves to the Americans. All of this had horrified the American military. If this was how Japan was going to defend their outward islands, what happens when you hit the homeland? How many dead? How many civilians committing suicide? Either by katana, gun, poison, or just straight up throwing themselves off cliffs before Japan surrendered. There had to be another way, and the Trinity test proved that there could be a potential other way. But why the nuke? Why did the nuke have to be used? The nuke's intended purpose was to strike Germany, but by now Germany had already been beaten. Its surrender had happened almost 2 months before any plans actually hitting the Japanese home islands were even coming into force. Now the simple answer is this. The Potsdam Conference, held to help solidify where borders would be in the post-war Europe. It was feared, especially by Attlee and Truman, that Stalin may one day want to expand his empire further west. And as such, a show of force could be useful. At the same time, in this conference, Stalin made remarks that made the other two fear that the Soviets may have spies in the Manhattan Project, which they did, and were planning to build a nuclear weapon of their own. And so, America wanted to prove that they had it first, and to act as a deterrent towards future conflict. Basically, this became the inciting incident of the Cold War, and the nuke would of course go on to play a major role in that whole series of events. Which brings us on to our next question. So how do you choose a location to nuke? I mean, wouldn't it make more sense to hit somewhere like Tokyo or the university capital of Japan, Kyoto? This was the job of Lieutenant Groves, and he decided on very strict guidelines on how to use the nuclear bomb in an offensive manner. Off the table were Tokyo and Kyoto. Despite their military significance, it was argued that their historical and cultural significance to the Japanese was much more important, and if America was to win this war, and then go on to occupy the Japanese home islands until a new government could be installed, it'd make sense not to piss off those people. This is the same sort of vibe, I guess, or way of thinking, to try to avoid what had happened with London and Berlin during their respective terror bombing campaigns, where it only worked to harden the resolve of the German and British people. And so, these strict guidelines had to be adhered. You could only strike out against a military target that was deemed not significant enough to the Japanese for it to be an uproar once the occupation had begun. Hence, Hiroshima, a military base, well, a town with a large military base presence, and Nagasaki, a naval port for the Imperial Navy. Now, there have been some accounts that say that America just dropped the bomb with no warning. This is completely untrue, as the Americans did drop leaflets over Hiroshima and then later Nagasaki. Although, at least for the Hiroshima one, it was fairly vague in what was going to happen. It warned of a massive airstrike against Hiroshima, but of course, they didn't want to leave the cat out of the bag. So, on the 6th of August, the planes took off. Yes, that's right, planes. You may have seen this famous image of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. But this is not the only plane. There were 6 of them in the sky over Hiroshima. A weather reconnaissance plane that went over Hiroshima, 2 that turned away to the next 2 targets, and 2 more planes that stayed alongside the Gay to act as its escorts, as of course, flying a single plane over enemy airspace, holding a nuclear device, is incredibly risky, and so the Americans did not do that. Of course, we know what happened afterwards. The bomb detonated at around 9 o'clock in the morning Japanese time, and reduced most of Hiroshima to rubble. The only buildings still standing were those that were significantly made of stone and far enough away from the initial blast. So, we're moving on to Nagasaki now, right? Wrong. There were 3 days in between Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 3 incredibly important days. And we're going to start with the 6th. So, only about an hour ago, the bomb has detonated over Hiroshima. And the Japanese Broadcasting Corporation is extremely confused, because their Hiroshima station has gone dark with absolutely no warning. And so they get into contact with the government about this. Then, the railroad company is getting involved, saying that they're having trouble contacting lines through Hiroshima. Then the military realizes that they can't contact the military bases in Hiroshima. Meanwhile, at the closest train station to Hiroshima, there are now columns and columns of refugees. Japan knows something is up, but they don't know exactly what. Because there wasn't all of the planes. Earlier that year, the Americans had hit Tokyo, and the devastation was basically comparable to the nuke. The only difference being the long-term effects of radiation poisoning in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that wasn't present for Tokyo. But nonetheless, they thought this was a firebombing, but they hadn't seen the squadron of planes that would have been needed to conduct such a raid. And this scared them. Japan would not find out about the atomic bombing until the day afterwards, from the American media. When Truman announced to the world that the United States had just dropped the first offensively used atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. Then, on the 8th, things got even worse for Japan, as the Soviet Union stopped its neutrality pact with Japan and invaded Japanese-controlled Manchuria. A day later, and once again, the planes are ready to fly. And yes, once again, planes. Only 5 this time, because one was not needed to test the weather around Hiroshima anymore. But still, 2 escort planes, the bus car, which dropped the bomb, and then 2 weather reconnaissance planes. Kokura was going to be the 3rd place to be nuked, had these 2 not been enough. And, well, we know how it goes. The sea was reduced to rubble, people were vaporized on the spot, and lingering health conditions and higher cancer rates for decades to come. Which brings us to Japan's surrender. Yes, I am of the opinion that the nuclear bombings killed less people than a ground invasion of Japan would have. As morbid as that is to think about, these bombings may have been necessary. Even as this historic peace agreement was being signed, as Emperor Hirohito was about to go on air and address his subjects, a coup d'etat happened. Japanese militants stormed the Japanese Broadcasting Company and attempted to put the emperor off the air to keep the war on as long as possible. So, while this is an incredibly dark part of human history, and something that I hope never happens again. It is important to look back and remember, not just the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but the countless others that could have happened if those two bombs had not been enough. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. There will be a couple more history-related videos coming out towards the end of the year. I have a very special Christmas one about a certain B-17. Thank you for watching.